What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. My guest today is Joshua Benaim, a US-based real estate developer, the founder of Aria Development Group. By the way, I like the opera reference there. And author of a brand new book on this exciting real estate sector. The book is called Real Estate, A Love Story. Joshua, welcome. It's 2:30 here in the afternoon in Dublin, Ireland. Whereabouts are you calling us from, and more importantly, what time of the morning is it there?
Oh, I'm here in New York City. I'm looking out at Union Square.
Wonderful.
I'd show you. I could give you I don't know if you can see out there. There's.
Oh wow, lovely. Yeah.
It's a sunny
Union
day
Square.
here in New York City.
I can see the Empire State Building.
Yes, we're making our New York style comeback.
Yeah.
Better late than never. But we're it's about 9:30 in the morning. And greetings.
Greetings from Ireland
across the ocean.
Yeah, it's great to be on with you today, Joshua. And normally I have a format that I go through for my audience, just to give a bit of context for people who don't know who you are. Could you just share a little bit of your backstory and just the early years and what kind of brought you into the real estate sector to begin with?
Sure. Well, it's a bit eclectic, and I've tried pretty much every other job. So that's sort of how I found my way into real estate. I spent time working in finance. I spent time singing opera around the world, hence the name Aria, which was how I started the company. That was, the passion for, I wanted to put the same kind of passion that I found in music into our business. Nice. And, that last 10, 12 years of trying to do that has been a journey a journey of discovery and learning and, making mistakes, trying again and adjusting. But I think I learned an enormous amount of real estate from my uncles. My grandfather. On my mom's side, my grandfather basically came to this country when in his 20s on a boat. It took him 113 days to get here. Whoa. And he couldn't cross the Atlantic because there were submarines. This was in 1941, and so he went across the Pacific. And came to
the long way
he
around.
Took the long route and came to San Pedro, California, and then to New York City, where he came to chauffeur his brother on his honeymoon, and he could drive, so he was able to take them on their honeymoon to Niagara Falls, and then he was an antiques man, so he would unpack and repack antiques, and basically, and he got into real estate in New York City, kind of with the eye of an antiquarian in a way, and finding old buildings and interesting old situations that weren't quite right. And I think a lot of his values, his kind of old world way of looking at things, were part of what inspired me to do real estate. And I got a more concrete chance to work with my uncles on a development in Lower Manhattan, not too long after September 11th.
Okay.
And so I was singing opera, traveling around the United States to different towns and performing, not quite in the big leagues at that time, and sort of regionally. And then there was an opportunity to work on developing this building. So I came back to New York to help on this project on William Street that ended up becoming, there's a lot more story, because that project went haywire and got very interesting. And then we ended up ultimately selling it, but it wasn't before I'd pretty much gotten hooked on the deal, hooked on the business.
It's quite interesting when you go into that. I mean, from going from the opera to kind of jumping into a real estate deal, are there many parallels between the two businesses or the two kind of interests?
Believe it or not, there are. And I think I would not have had the guts to, I'm so much more conservative, cautious. I'm not a big risk taker. I'm not a gunslinger. I was scared to death, basically. I wanted to have a stable career, and I wasn't sure that I could do entrepreneurship, or that would be something that would really, be suited to what I was doing. So what opera did is basically you stand out there on stage, you're totally vulnerable, you pour your guts out, people either love it or they hate it. I mean, if they love it, they're applauding, they're cheering, whatever. If they hate it, they don't say anything. But then in the next morning, you read in the newspaper, this was
Yeah.
lousy.
This they hated
You
it.
blew
Yeah.
it. And so it was kind of a palpable risk that I had never felt. Like I'd worked a little bit on Wall Street for a couple of years. The opera world, but it's also a world where you're deeply connected to your emotions. You're deeply connected to trying to communicate something. And I kind of feel like I want my buildings to communicate something. I want them to mean something to the people that are using them. And in a sense, what I've over time come to discover is that if you can make people happy without a whole lot of money, which is what opera is great at,
Yeah.
we were doing that. When I was singing opera, I remember one occasion I was in a singing in Rome, and we were staying in Domus Pacis, which was almost like a monastery outside Rome. And I was in a tiny room. It was white walls, a cross, and two cots sharing with a friend. But you know what? We were singing Rossini. It was one of the best times of my life. They had every morning we ate communally, a big bowl of pasta. And so what I realized when I started developing apartments, because that's really my trade, is building homes and apartments in cities. It doesn't take much if you give people the right details and the right essentials. But you have to infuse it with meaning. Somehow there has to be a taste of beauty, a taste of art, a taste of friendship, romance. Those things don't have to cost a gazillion dollars, and that to me is part of the art of real estate, is making people happy on a budget that they can afford.
Finding the
That's
magic
kind of our
formula.
secret sauce.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, actually. Yeah, it's that sort of magic formula that kind of pulls all the pieces together. My background is architecture, so I kind of understand exactly what you're getting at. And you've established your own firm. Before that, I mean, where did you kind of learn your trade? Was it, you mentioned you were working on Wall Street, but did you do any other real estate experience working for other firms or anything?
Oh, sure. I started out in Credit Suisse First Boston. I worked for 2-3 years there. I spent some time working for my uncles, trying to develop a project in Lower Manhattan, and that was an incredible training. And I had to run. I also had to renovate a lobby. This is not a very big undertaking. It's just the lobby of a building, but basically you have a multinational crew. The contractor was French. The laborers were from Eastern Europe or South America. Nobody spoke the same language. I remember I faxed. I wanted to put a beautiful new door, so I sent a fax of the door design to the contractor, who sent it to the door guy. Of course, as I faxed it, you know how faxes used to sort
Oh,
of
yeah. So it's sort of created a sway kind of pattern. Yeah.
it created a sway, and so the door didn't fit even remotely. It was thrown off to scale completely. So it was the architect's nightmare. So
Wow.
basically, I learned a bit doing that, and then I was honestly I was afraid to dive into this thing. I went to business school. I did Harvard Business School for 2 years. Continued to try to build my skill base and then I worked for 3 years after that at a group called Square Mile Capital that was investing in joint ventures, complex equity investment, and a little more on the investment side, a little less on the development side. And I
Right.
got to do a couple of interesting deals, one of which was in Long Island City, which has always been an up and coming neighborhood, but it never had really up and come. Even when I got there, there was a big moment in the 80s, and they built a tall office building, and then nothing for 20 years.
Okay.
So Bloomberg rezoned this area, and we got the opportunity to go into what had been a urban renewal municipal 5-acre garage that was being used as a flea market.
Wow.
So this is something that's literally 5 minutes from Midtown Manhattan, but it was an empty wasteland.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
it was actually where the prison bus dropped off, which is the bus that takes you up to the prison. So it would always be dumping, and people would be it was the most sad scene in New York City. If you want to go somewhere to just feel human misery and understand what
Go there.
can happen, you used to go there.
Okay.
Believe it or not, now there are 30 brand new buildings in that neighborhood because Bloomberg kicked it off with the one project that I got to work on in my old firm. And once that first one went up and the garage came down, that was sucking up all of the air in the neighborhood. That neighborhood has has truly transformed. And then the saga continued when Amazon was going to come to that neighborhood.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
And then it actually, some of our politicians in their wisdom decided to blow that deal up. The company didn't necessarily deport themselves with the most grace in terms of how they
It's
dealt
like a
with some of the
beauty contest for all
they
these
did
cities, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was a bit of a, it was not, I don't think it was the most tasteful maneuver. They made all the cities compete. And then Long Island City won, but then there were a few people that decided that it wasn't a good idea, and they didn't do the work that needed to be done in terms of going to meet with the neighbors, sitting down with people in the projects nearby, and
it seemed a bit arrogant, all right, the way they went about
it was very arrogant, and there was a talk of that they needed a helicopter pad, and they weren't going to ride the subways with everybody else. And that doesn't go over too well. And I think you learn over this business that you have to be one part politician, one part architect, one part
diplomat.
Diplomat. And but it really teaches you a lot about people.
It does, for sure.
That's how we grow.
And so you must, you've learned a lot on that project for sure. I mean, was that the kind of project that gave you the shift in mindset to kind of take on the risk of starting your own firm? Or like, what was the shift in mindset that sort of drove you to starting your own firm?
Well, I think it was more on the investment side, to be totally honest. I didn't know if that would succeed. When New York, in 2008, when we closed that deal, New York was in free fall.
On its knees.
And that building was leased to New York City, which was an investment grade credit, so we thought. But at that particular moment, when all the banks were crashing, this was October of 2008.
Wow.
It wasn't quite clear what would happen. So, but in fact, what kind of drove me to do it was at the very end of 2008, I went to look at a project that was in Florida for a big mall where the lender was selling it at a huge discount. And it was just a terrific property with a cinema, Whole Foods, the whole works. It was weirdly designed. So I have to say it was a little bit, but all the tenants were flying out. And so I thought, wow, if this is a really interesting opportunity. What convinced me was a value investment philosophy and how I try to avoid risk, which I learned over a number of years. But basically, my approach to starting Aria was to marry a value investment philosophy, which we can go into in greater depth, but finding things that are mispriced, misunderstood, undermanaged, damaged, rent controlled, complex, and turning them into liquid, beautiful properties. And also trying to take the best of what I'd learned from my uncles, kind of a traditional real estate ethos where you shake hands with somebody and that's a deal.
The deal is done, yeah.
And so that was my idealistic view. But because of that philosophy, basically, I had seen the safest deals did the worst in a sense because the price was so high. So what really stuck with me was that if you could somehow pay a lower price, you're eliminating a substantial portion of the risk. It's very hard to do, and I've tried for 10, 15. It's really incredibly difficult. So and still you make tons of mistakes. But what convinced me that I could try was, and I don't like risk. I just hate it. I really don't like it. This last year has been hell.
Yeah, but it's been tough.
Basically, what convinced me was if you find some way to get into something at a slightly, and I'll give you a bunch of examples of different things we've done, but then even if you screw up, you're okay. And that's what
mitigate the risk. Yeah,
mitigate the risk. That was what was called the margin of safety by Seth Klarman, who wrote a book that I love, which is called Margin of Safety. And basically he's saying, make it, if you can find some way to see something others don't and buy things right, then you can be the biggest idiot, or even the world just stays the way it is and you're still okay. And that convinced me that I could start a company. And that was the philosophy that has guided me. I've certainly not always stayed 100 as true as I would like. I've gotten carried away on certain things. I've in some cases blown it. I tried to renovate a building by myself with no, and totally blew it. But because of the location and the value that was created by the buy, in some cases,
you can afford to make
that mitigated the risk. that that's been kind of my watchword.
It sounds like a good strategy, because definitely if you buy, I mean, it's funny, I was chatting with some people about this the other evening, and we were talking about, if you buy a property that doesn't have a tenant, you can be at risk of sitting there trying desperately to find that tenant for a long time. But if you buy it at a fraction of its kind of true value, or if it's, if the market has fallen in such a way that you're able to buy it below cost of construction or something like that, that margin of safety that you've got there gives you a whole load of room to maneuver. And even if you're sitting there for a year or two, you've still got the ability to kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Yes, I think vacancy is it's a double-edged sword, but it's one of the best. If in the right hands, that's an incredible strategy. And I've seen it work both ways, but I think that's where those are the kind of situations where you can make money without taking big risk. I'll give you an example. We recently, a few years ago, we bought a 1960s office building, completely vacant, 400,000 square feet, totally obsolete.
Wow.
Nobody really wanted it. It was a white elephant. We are in the midst of leasing 338 apartments. We turned it into 338 apartments. One of the things I've become really specialized in and love is turning reuse of old buildings, office or hotel, into apartments.
Conversion, nice.
We converted this, and you don't have the risk of excavation. You don't have the risk of what's on, subsurface conditions, water, all the different things that you have. We were able to buy it for, it had been a countrywide financial loan in 2006 for 43 million, and then we got it for 9.
Wow.
And so the price, if you, what to me, it shows that at the time it was fully leased by the government. So if you buy something that's priced to perfection, everything has to go right. And that's a very rare occurrence. I mean, as we know in this business, nothing, rarely does everything go right. There are those few moments in a career when things go right, and then you're like, thank you. I didn't, yes, exactly. But usually what it means is that you've done an enormous amount of hard work that nobody appreciates.
Yeah.
You've worked your ass off, and you've basically you've positioned things so that things can go right.
Yeah,
there's a funny line. I was going to say the funny line in a Rossini opera, which basically where he's joking around and he says, basically, look, the cheese just fell on the macaroni. How often does the cheese fall on the macaroni? Usually you've been working on the bowl, you put it there, it's been 3-4 years, you do nothing, and then finally you put it there, and then suddenly the macaroni falls down, and the cheese falls right on the macaroni.
Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say, it's like the people that think that you're an overnight success, but you've spent the last 10 years working on it.
Right. It's true.
In terms of, I mean, that's fascinating that you got it for 9 million. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, specifically in that particular deal, did you have to compete with other people on that, or did you just, happen to ferret out that deal?
In that one, we did not. We bought it in a privately negotiated transaction from someone who had bought the note. There were a bunch of other complexities with that deal. There was a parking problem. There was a lease which required somebody to pay an enormous amount for parking, but maybe it could or could not be terminated in bankruptcy. There were all sorts of complexities, and often those complexities swirl around, sort of upside down capital structures like that. We were able to get through just through a privately negotiated transaction. In other cases, and as increasingly when everything has become somewhat competed, the beauty is that there's often a herd mentality, and many people are afraid to do something different from what the conventional wisdom is. Even in marketed situations, people aren't always cognizant of what's there. I think that, but when you're looking at corporate divestitures, I don't know. I have a cousin, Greg, who's a brilliant guy, and who bought a gigantic campus in Stamford, Connecticut, outside, right on the highway, fully vacant, almost 1 million square feet.
Wow. And
he bought it for peanuts, but everyone was like, what the hell are you going to do with this thing? And basically industrial and flex space 15 years ago, before Amazon and the whole thing, it was kind of, who the hell is building factories in northeastern United States, high cost areas.
Yeah.
So he bought it, and then he figured out how to put Sony there, and then there was all sorts of Sony Music, and then he got Chelsea Piers, which is a big sports and athletic complex, to come take a bunch of the space indoor and outdoor with basketball, soccer, and it worked. The flip side of that is the worst deal I ever did, which was at my old company, for which I apologize to everyone involved. Basically, years ago, we bought another 400,000 square foot industrial property in New Jersey for what seemed like peanuts. I mean, it was originally, I want to say it was $6 million purchase, 400,000 square feet of building, excellent electrical, water. It had been a heavy industrial site,
Right.
with the attendant environmental nightmare, basically. But you drive up. This is a classic American big red brick building, Lenox China. I don't know if that company. They made all sorts of very famous china for presidents and different things over the years, silver, and a big American flag waving on the front lawn. And you drive up. This is a great thing. Somebody's going to want this. But it turned out that it was kind of first of all, it was sort of in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It wasn't on the crossroads of major highways. It was in southern New Jersey near Atlantic City and some old casinos. And there was a shipbuilding company that wanted to buy it and pay us an extra $1 million for the property that we should have taken it. Two brothers that built ships. And if they wanted to build ships in this thing, it would have been perfect. It was gigantic. Then there was a tuna fish company. And they said, well, there's all this water. We had, because of the China manufacturing, there was insane rail connection and everything, and they couldn't do it. Nobody could make it work. And in the end, it was sort of we sold it. It was sort of a disaster. Okay. I wonder now, with Amazon putting a lot of heat on industrial property, if even some of these farther flung warehouses are maybe now they're worth a lot of money. We probably blew it, but it's a case in point that vacancy can be your friend. Value investment, it can really be your friend. It can also be a trap if you don't look carefully.
Yeah. So, if you're stuck with the property, it's a disaster. But if you have like a good roster of tenants and people that you have connections with who you can kind of put into that, you can kind of double or treble your money very easily. Yeah. It's fascinating. That's some of the things that I like to kind of get into. In terms of behaviors, this is such a cyclical market. There's ups and downs and there's all that. And over the years, I've had my own challenges. I mean, do you have any strategies for, the resilience that you require to kind of deal with the stress and all that kind of stuff over the years for example, taking that deal, the fact that it turned into a disaster. I mean, there's a lot of stress that comes with that. Have you developed any kind of strategies around that kind of stress management?
Eating.
Singing opera, I suppose.
Singing opera, I highly recommend it. Yeah. It's Italian love songs, Irish melodies. I love all of it. And basically, when you're singing, you're also breathing. Right. So it's much more athletic than it looks. So, and you're essentially meditating with music because your lungs are pumping. So I love music. That's really my escape, and it's hard to practice. Depends on where you live, with what the neighbors are like. If they don't mind a little bit of noise here and there, I think having somewhat of a philosophical outlook on things is sort of necessary. But I still advocate putting your whole self into your work, because otherwise, what's the point? You know what I mean? Basically, I think that, and then when it goes bad, you hurt the worst.
You have to own it.
You got to own it. I think you got to, whatever part of the business you're really focused on, I think it's worth cultivating the others. If you're working on the part that only uses your brain, spend some time working with your hands. Renovate something, help fix something, build something, put bricks down. If you're working only with your hands, work on the creative side, the architectural design part, the thing. You got to put your brain, your heart into these relationships and into your work. I think it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And I think it goes true for business too. If you don't put your passion into it, you're not only are you missing out, but everyone around you is missing out on whatever it is that you may have to offer to this world.
Your book, Real Estate: A Love Story. I'm curious, with a title like that, give us some of the inspiration behind writing this book.
Well, it started basically as something I started writing down on hotel napkins when I was traveling a lot for work, and stationery, and it started pouring out of. At first, I thought I was writing a primer on how to invest in real estate. So I thought I would write kind of an investment book, on purely an investment book on just here's how you do it. This is how I do it. I look for the marriage of value investment, and here are my 7 value investment strategies with traditional real estate and its values of location, scarcity, and beauty. And that's been my motto as starting this company, and that is what the book. That's at the center of the book, and
right.
All of that information and strategic thinking is still in the book, but it's all illustrated with stories, as we've been discussing, because basically all the early readers said, it's great, I love the textbook part, but would you please just tell more of the story so we understand what the hell you're talking about, and it's more interesting to read. So it ended up being 4 parts. The first part, which is kind of the love story, is my own journey in real estate and how I learned how to do this, how I learned really the different values and thought processes that make real estate interesting to me, which is to me a world of ideas and relationships. And I think it's one of the more joyful and colorful and elaborate businesses to be in, with a lot of history, a lot of tradition. And so that's part 1. Part 2 is really the value investment strategies. There's a chapter on vacancy. There's a chapter on risk. There's a chapter on honor. There's that chapter, all the different components. Part 3 is, as my career has evolved, I've come to really love development and how to create something that makes people happy for not a lot of money. And that's really the art of real estate development, which is part 3. And then the pandemic hit. So I added this part 4, which is essentially what I think cities need to make a full comeback and build back better. And that's in a nutshell the terrain that's covered by this
that's
book.
Very interesting. Maybe we'll just delve into that, because I've been looking at the impact of COVID-19 myself, and I run a business park here in Dublin, and for the most part, I would say we've been about 95%, empty, the business park. I mean, the units are not vacant, but they're just not in use at the moment. Everyone's working from home, and it makes me wonder about the future of the office. And a lot of people are talking about the move to work from home and stuff, which I don't entirely buy myself, because I do think that there's an energy from being in a building together with your colleagues, and there's a culture that develops around, and a camaraderie and stuff. But what are your views on the direction that the workplace is going in that regard?
I think it's basically it will remain essential, because for the very point that you described, that there's no way to train and mentor new young people and talent without seeing them. It's I can get by. Some of the old hands are good at doing this, and it's okay. But how do you instill the thinking, the approach, if you can't sit and sort of talk to people and engage and build those relationships? Many of us are drafting off of relationships that we've known for 10, 20, 30 years, whereas some of the new folks don't have that benefit. So I also think that people will want to congregate in cities, because that's where you fall in love, and you meet people, you build your career. So I believe those things remain. On the other hand, I think that having worked in a hell of a lot of offices over my life, many of them leave a lot to be desired. And a lot. I think that basically the soulless, bone crushing, plug yourself into a computer and sit there with no light, no natural light, no beauty, no cafe, no friendship. What makes work really stimulating and interesting? Meeting people, friendship, relationships, new ideas, thoughts, taking a walk. Some of the best deals are made, I don't know, out in the woods,
spontaneously. Yeah,
ski trip, having a beer. That's where interesting stuff often happens. So my view is that cities more generally, but at a minimum, offices need to really adapt and evolve and be somewhere compelling. It's got to have, I think it has to have more hospitality,
for sure,
involvement, more residential, more fun.
Experiential, I think, isn't that it?
100%. It has to be compelling for someone to be there. I think it has to have a little bit of light, a little bit of nature, if you can bring it into the space somehow in some creative ways. Room for collaboration. People need coffee, and is there a place to sort of? I believe that those, and some offices won't necessarily make it if they weren't adapted for that. Either their location or the bones cannot adapt, and hopefully we'll turn some of those into apartments, and then and in my vision, people will live closer to work when, if that happens, then there'll be more houses where people could even walk to work or be really close.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at cities like Singapore, for example, they have introduced kind of layers where the city is kind of commercial on the road level, but then they put the apartments and stuff directly above. So you're into a situation where people live and work in the same kind of block in the same area so they work in the same place as they kind of basically sleep. And it beats this kind of long commutes and stuff where there's a city area that is for offices, and then there's another area that is for. So it does seem like to kind of integrate work and life together is a better way than to do it than to expect people to sit put in their home and not have to commute at all, because we have the digital technology now, we don't need to travel anymore. Technically that might be true, but I think what you said there earlier is absolutely true. If you speak to any architectural firm or engineering firm who recruit graduates from the universities and stuff, like it's very, very hard for them to train somebody up, because you don't spend, the training is not just sitting in front of them the way you and I are now sitting in front of each other on a screen. It's overhearing the difficult conversation that your boss has to have with a client who's angry about something, or all of those things that you absorb through kind of osmosis just by being there, as opposed to, I want you to listen to this phone call now and I want you to write down what I say. That's not how it works. It's more from just being exposed.
I think that's the key. And how do we that's sort of what makes cities so dynamic, and I think why they're so resilient. And New York City feels very vibrant, although our office utilization rate is only finally now cracking, sort of ticking back up and getting, and the subways still aren't quite where they were.
Well, that's understandable. I think people are still worried about the Delta variant and things like that.
Sure. No, it's still a concern lingering in everyone's mind. But I think that in some ways, if we can imagine a more positive version of this future post-COVID, where we rethink some of these things that we were doing, long commutes that maybe aren't so good for the kids, or for the family, or for people's life. Maybe it's not necessary, or maybe it's a few days a week. I think it becomes, I think, a more hybrid solution, maybe just more humane for all of us, as long as work actually gets done, which is another more complicated thing. But
the productivity side is important, all right. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, since the lockdown started, I found myself going to work later. I mean, I would still leave the house to go to the office because I kind of find being in the office good. But rather than leaving first thing in the morning to get ahead of the rush hour, I would actually find myself leaving at 9:30 or something like that. So have breakfast with the family, enjoy time with your family, as opposed to being this ghost who's kind of gone at 6 in the morning and
Right.
and arrive home just 5 minutes before they go to bed.
Exhaustion,
And
collapse, and
yeah,
exhaustion.
that's it
I
exactly.
know that. I know that routine. Well, isn't it? I mean, to me, that's where there's some hope here, because by forcing us to change our lives a little bit, who knows? Maybe maybe I think those of us fortunate enough to be able to have kept the job and get through this, maybe we can see things differently, and try again this time a little different, and
Yeah,
maybe it'll
I
be
think
better.
so. And tell me this, Joshua, has this experience caused you to start looking at the way you design your apartment buildings differently? Are you kind of introducing things that weren't previously there?
That's very interesting. I would say yes and no. Yes, in that the technological changes that have really been accelerated by COVID, many of these things were already underway. Um, Packages delivery. In this project that we did with the old office building, we had so much space. I tried to create the largest package room in North America, because when you see how many packages, the throughput of packages that, basically growing up in New York, our doorman was there in many cases in the building to keep you alive, and keep the building safe. Now these guys are basically shipping, okay, offload this one, with hundreds of boxes a day.
It's a handling
So
agent, basically.
yes, exactly. So we've become, I mean, that's a small detail, but I think we've tried to create work from home niches in some of our spaces without adding a ton of square feet, so that people can get more work done, broadband internet. We already were making outdoor recreation spaces on the rooftops, and everyone loves that amenity. With you put a chef's kitchen and some barbecues.
Oh,
I put a
nice.
pizza oven in one, so people can make bread, pizza. That kind of. I think there's basically the change that we've made. We were already making a lot of these changes, and we were already building mostly in walkable neighborhoods. So those are things that I think we were onto, that I think hopefully now many others are sort of coming with us on that. We've also expanded some of the geographies in which we've invested to smaller cities that people are really loving. So people realize that you can have a nice cup of coffee and make friends and do your work, and go out to a show or something. Also in Nashville or Charlotte, Miami, Kansas City, many other cities around the United States, and they're seeing a bit of a renaissance, the smaller cities. So we've made a number of investments in some adaptive reuse historic buildings, and some ground up projects in these cities. So we're trying to bring a little bit of the ethos of, we brought New York style apartments, small apartments, small but sexy, mind you. So it's definitely, people love these apartments, and nobody believes that they're small. They walk in and they think they're large, but in fact, if you look at it, nobody really lives in square feet. Only architects and engineers design in square feet, but people actually live in space in the real world, and they love these units. So we're getting ferocious rents per square foot on these things, or sales price per square foot. We brought it to Washington. They said it was the most ridiculous idea. Who the hell would ever live in those things? This is a genteel southern town with large apartments, and then they went like hotcakes. Then we did the same thing in Miami, and we've actually sold out a project. This is a for sale product. We sold close to 400 units in the last 2 months.
Wow.
With smaller condominiums that are based on a similar ethos of location, amenities, and really efficient but sexy floor plans with a bit of technology. And that now we had a near-death experience in the COVID thing where everyone's saying, well, no one's ever going to live in these apartments again. It's who's going to live in cities? The city is dead. People only want large suburban homes. I think it's created a bit of a bubble in our economy that people, yes, do need suburban homes right now for this duration of the pandemic. But I think a lot of the younger folks got sick of living in their parents' basement and decided to,
back to the city.
Now that the economy's picked back up, they can get a good job, and now they're moving back. So I think our business plan will be vindicated, yet again. But
good news.
That's what keeps it exciting.
Joshua, we're nearing the end of our discussion today. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, looking back on your career, do you recognize any major shifts in your mindset where you've done like a 180-degree change in direction as to where you thought this business was about?
That's really interesting. I think it's been more of a process of gradual growth. I think that over the last 10 years, I would say I went in as an investor and I came out as a developer.
Right.
In a sense that, and now maybe I'll go back to being an investor. It's a lot more relaxing. You don't have to worry about, you have a lot less to
do.
The creativity of, when you're investing, you're trying to buy it for less than it's worth. That's gotten so difficult. And so it's still there, but it's difficult. And when you're developing, you're trying to make it worth a lot more than it cost you. So it's sort of two sides of the same coin. And it's different parts of your brain. The investor is more the rational sort of structures, complex deals and structures and sort of numbers. And the developer is more the creative. Well, how do you look at this office building and see an apartment house?
Left
how do we?
Brain.
Yeah. It's kind of. I think that I've come to enjoy really. In the beginning, I was very risk averse and also very logical and rational, which I still am. I'm not. I haven't abandoned all that stuff, but I think the more you work in this and explore how you can create value by transformation of an asset, by changing parts of it, by really studying human nature and how can you make something, what kind of a closet. The first time I did it, I thought, okay, everyone's going to be roommates, so I'll put as many bedrooms as possible on this floor plate of an old building. So there were 10 bedrooms. I made 15 bedrooms on that each floor. And lots of small 2 bedrooms, people were sharing roommates, the whole thing. But I sort of forgot about closets. You know what I mean? And some people like a closet. So we learn and adapt, but each detail of the development or in the creation of amenities for an apartment building, we took that old office building, it had a glass atrium. And that was the former entrance that had been decommissioned. And so we thought, this is a really special, the 60s office window design was not optimal. And so many of the units had very interesting shaped windows. And this one was all glass. So we thought, what if we turned it into some sort of a sunroom for all the tenants? And then I thought, well, what if we turned it into a Moroccan sunroom with colorful tiles and lounge chairs and, sort of almost like a lounge. And you know what? During the pandemic, a couple got married in the Moroccan solarium of this 1960s building. So to me, that's a
success.
That's what more could you want, right?
Yeah, you've done it. And final question, Joshua, if you had the opportunity to whisper some words of advice into the ear of yourself as a young 20-year-old, knowing now what you know, what guidance would you give yourself, your younger self?
Oh, I'd probably tell myself to go a little easier on myself. I think I think I would say that you don't have to be perfect, that it's okay to make mistakes. And as long as you go in with a good heart and goodwill and your head is screwed on right, you don't have to be afraid. And, you can go out there and do business and make things without fear, and that you'll still be a good person. You'll still be loved. You'll still be, what matters most in life are, the things you leave behind, friendships and your creative output are worth fighting for. And one should go forth without fear.
That sounds like great advice, Joshua. Thanks so much for your time today. Just if people are looking to pick up a copy of your book, where's the best place to find that?
Sure. Well, you can check it out on realestatealovestory.com, and it's for sale in lots of bookstores, online and in person.
Okay.
And
I'll put a link in the show notes. And if anyone wanted to, reach out or learn more about your company and stuff like that, what's the best way to find you?
I would say our website is ariadevelopmentgroup.com, and there's also arialiving.com, which is some of our aesthetic creations and more for a consumer standpoint.
Nice.
And I'm also personally on LinkedIn and Instagram, Joshua Benaim.
I'll have a look.
And happy to say hi and help encourage the next generation of talent in our field.
Great stuff. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Joshua. And I wish you the best of luck with selling your book and your apartments.
It was a great pleasure. And I hope to see you in person one of these days.
We'll do that. We'll do that for sure. We'll have a beer somewhere in New York.
Terrific.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Behind the Facade. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my number one ask is for you to leave a review or indeed share the episode out with someone you think may benefit from it. In the show notes, you will find links to the various things discussed today. And if you have any questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you can reach out to me on social media using the handle Gavin J. Gallagher, and this includes my YouTube channel. Lastly, you can stay up to date with the various things I am working on by adding your name to my email list, which you will find over at gavinjgallagher.com/go. All right, folks, that's all for now. See you again next week.